Hello, it's Jack Tutor here of Attention Magazine. Welcome to Crucial Listening, the podcast where I speak with musicians and sound artists about 3 albums that are important to them. My guest this time is Joni Void, which is the pseudonym of Jean Néant, a Montréal-based French-British producer whose 3rd album for Constellation, Every Day Is the Song, is out now. Depends centrally on a Walkman that Jean had in their midst for a couple of years, captured a whole bunch of audio snippets and arranged them into the pieces on this record, which these pieces have flashes of conversations, intimate, localized moments, and you spend the whole record wondering about the connections between these disparate bits of audio that have been put into relation through the arrangement. It's very much a record that almost is one step above the sounds themselves. You're led to think about how these sounds are compiled, how chronology is scrambled in the way that the record depicts various events, how it loops certain sounds. Feels like almost examining someone's process of memory, the way in which memory muddles with chronology, draws associations between sounds which can often feel divorced from, notions of geographic or chronological proximity. And there's a lot of brightness on this record. There's some spirals of darkness. Listen on headphones. It's really lovely. I hope you enjoy the album, and I hope you enjoy this conversation with Jean as well. So much enthusiasm for this music, and it really spilled onto me. I had a great time with these records too. So thank you for listening as always. If you want to support the podcast, you can do over at Ko-fi, ko-fi.com/crucial listening. You can donate monthly or one-off, any amount you please, to help keep the podcast ticking. Struggled there. Okay, I hope you enjoy this conversation. This is Joni Void on Crucial Listening. Hello Jean, welcome to Crucial Listening.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Thank you for coming on the podcast. You are here to talk about 3 important albums and maybe a few more too. So before we get stuck into those, I want to talk about your new album, Every Day Is a Song, which is out on Constellation and with which I've been having many wonderful experiences. So central to this album, as I understand, is audio captured on a Walkman purchased back in 2020 at Death of Vinyl, right? And then lost at a Backwash show 2 years later. I mean, if you're going to lose it anywhere, it would be there. Could we start with this Walkman? Tell me a bit about why you bought it, if you can remember. Obviously, it's a few years ago now, and why you kept it with you throughout this, 2-year period.
It's really a random story. I do appreciate that they put in the press release that I lost the first one at the Backwash show. I that was just a little fact in whatever list of bullet points I gave them, and I never expected it to actually make it onto the press release. I have since purchased a Walkman that is exactly the same as the previous one for continuity reasons. So So there is a second one. I am still recording, but I do like the dramatic effect in the press release about the first one.
Yeah, it's good.
Just, yeah, I guess that album is a time capsule of my years 2021, and a big element of that was buying this random Sony Walkman TCM 323 cassette recorder. I was just at Defa Vinyl, which is a random, sorry, it's not random, beloved local record store, and yeah, they just had these Walkmans on display, and I think they were like 15, $20, and
Nice.
I was like, oh, cool, let's grab one. And then just realized that, wait, I have something to record straight to tape. I don't know if you've experienced a Zoom microphone, but the time it takes sometimes when you switch it on to just get the screen and be able to record has always been an issue for me when I'm trying to capture these, like just a siren passing by or just some like sound that by the time I've switched on the microphone, it's already gone.
Yeah.
Suddenly I'm with this new field recorder, not supposed to be one, but it just records immediately, and I get this bonus tape quality to it. So added to that, there was also, I mean, that's it. I bought that microphone, I guess, February 2020. The next month, something happened that I think the whole world experienced. Go confined home, and yeah, that, like a lot of people, well, I was just going through my music library, and because of this Walkman, also realized like, wait, I can play all these tapes that I've been hoarding for years, and that I've never really had a system to play on, because it was such a part of these, like, I don't know, DIY shows I was helping with prior to like 2019. And yeah, sometimes the gift would be someone giving you a tape at the end, or just some that I collected, but yeah, didn't really have a means to play them. So added to the field recordings, this what I call sample binge I fell into with my whole like vinyl, also like kind of just going through lots of records that I would otherwise never play, but just randomly was like, okay, let's have these sessions where I'm just going through tapes and vinyls and just messing around with them and trying to, like, I don't know, get sound effects sometimes, not even like get a proper sample. So yeah, and just, yeah, I guess it was just this little tool I had during pandemic that just whenever I walked out or something, I would just record snippets and export them, then to then just go through them and take these like little seconds here and there. And so yeah, it just began this collage tape album that I guess I was also starting releasing tapes with my own label. So I sort of like designed this album that I figured would be my debut tape album on my own label, but then decided in 2022 that I would end up releasing it with Constellation instead. So the irony now is that it exists on vinyl and CD, but not on tape.
That is fabulous. As you say, this has a time capsule quality to it. You go out, you'd whip this Walkman out, you'd be able to record snippets of audio. It's true.
The name, it's literally like Walkman, and you're a man.
That's it, you're living it. I wonder whether, as you're thinking over the record now, are there like specific memories or like unusual, I don't know, particularly prominent memories of recording on that Walkman that kind of leap out at you when you're listening back through this album that you can recall?
Oh, for sure. I mean, yeah, it's definitely a weird experience for me. Yeah, those two tracks where I really, for me, the collage track, well, technically three, there's also the last one, but World is Spinning at 33 RPM and Vortex 80% speed one. That for me, listening to those tracks, it's just, yeah, these like 1 second memories. I'm just like, oh god, like this specific location and that. But yeah, I still tried putting some narratives that I'm just, I don't know if people caught. So one sample I really absolutely love in Vortex 90% speed one, and one of those I'm just like, it just, you had to be there in the moment to catch a recording like this. This relates also to sort of the concept I had about this album being train tracks, where it's supposed to be, well, not, it's about like voyage and motion and transportation. So there is this idea of like, oh, tracks like a train. So Vortex 90% speed one, there's a moment you hear someone say, open the fucking doors, man. And that's me in the GO train trying to get to Hamilton, and this train just stopped. I guess there's some technical issue or whatever, and yeah, this guy started freaking out and just started like hitting on the doors and just like, open the fucking doors, man. So
Oh, wow.
I record that with my Walkman, and then yeah, minutes later, which you hear in the a song also, like is kind of this first sample that you hear at the beginning of the track, and then later in the track you hear a train agent be like, well, unfortunately the technical issues have been solved, but somebody had to jump out of the train more urgently than others, and so now they're probably on the tracks, and so we can't get the train moving. So I was stuck in that train for I think like an hour 30 or something, and yeah, it was like first shutdown, then this guy escapes like out of the train, and then I get to record, and then they're like, oh well, we're gonna put you on another train. So we got to the station, and then the second train arrives, which this is actually the end of In Between Moments. That train arriving into the station is that train that just has is packed already with people, and this is pandemic. You know, we're all masked, we're all trying to distance, and they're like, we're putting you on this other train that is already like full, and you can just see the faces of everyone inside, like as this train arrives on the station. So yeah, it's pretty things like this. It's just, and then yeah. In post-credit scene, which is supposed to be it's post-credits. This I guess happened in January 2022. It's me in the Paris subway station, and you hear someone. There's like this alarm, and someone picks up the phone, and he's like, "Hey, it's me, it's David. Yeah, someone just jumped on the tracks. Yeah, sorry, they're on the metro tracks because some hobo or something in Paris decided to jump on the tracks." So once again in the album, you have someone like jumping on the tracks while the track is playing.
Wow.
That's one of the most I can explain.
That's so cool. I think it plays into as well this sense of non-linear time that you have on the album, where that is a kind of linear causation, but then it's occurring in amongst this total spaghetti of time running in different directions, which is fabulous. It literally throws you for a loop.
Yeah, I kind of said I use the Walkman as a camera more than like some video tool, but it's definitely with sound you do have photographic memory, but it doesn't play like a photo or even a video, because video is weird. You do have the sound aspect, but I feel like just the sound itself without the like visual like frame of reference is an experience in itself. And so yeah, just being able to like catch all these like little snippets on my Walkman was definitely this manic editing of my own memory of just being able to relive these moments, because there's a lot obviously you can't catch with the Walkman, like things I tried to record, but then export them, you're like, oh no, there was too low, or there's too much other noise going on at the same time. And this is what I like about the Walkman. It's shitty. It's like it's gone by and it just catches everything kind of like compressed, whatever it's hearing. So yeah, you can kind of you can record shows sometimes. The quality is so nice, and then some of them just this wall of noise.
Lovely.
So yeah, it's just an interesting audio experience. Like I don't really want, proper crystal clear field recordings. I want this new experience of like, oh, but once you recorded it and you deep fried it through tape, like what sound comes out of that?
Yeah, absolutely. I feel like that this may come up later as well in our discussion on at least one of the important picks. Definitely cropped up in my head. So the album is so nice. I will put a link in the show notes so people can check it out, and please do. It's awesome. Like, it gives me a lot of Walkman nostalgia. So yeah, we should talk about your important records now. And one question I like to ask at this point is about how you thought about the term important. And I know in the document you sent over to me, there were definitely some thoughts as to how you wanted to take that prompt. So yeah, could you tell me a bit about how you understood the word important in order to come up with the list of 3 records that you did?
Absolutely. So yeah, I did do for Echoes and Dust recently. They asked me sort of the same thing through text, like written form, like 3 multiple albums, and so I obviously did 3 that was like, from my early influences and music that still has like that influence on me, kind of where I come from. So I didn't want to just do part 2 of that for the podcast. So I was like, let's do something more that like is important and essential for me now, but essentially since this record was made, because I basically started this album in 2020 and 2021, had it almost finished, and then 2022 was basically confirming with Constellation about releasing it, doing some final touches. But I decided like, instead of having like, what inspired this album, more like what music have I discovered since this. Well, now I can't separate myself from, but then I'm like, this is only since 2021 I actually know this music, but it's been such an important sound for me, and obviously the music I'm making now is very influenced by these albums in particular.
Very nice. So let's go with the first one then, Jean. I don't know which one you
I don't
want
know
to
if
go
you have
with
an order.
first.
I didn't really have an order, so anything goes for me.
Okay, I have them in an order on my sheet, and it's random, but Death Is Not the End is the first one on the list. So
my god.
So if that works with you, if you could give me a little introduction as to why this one's important to you, that would be great.
We're getting into the UK good stuff right off the bat. So yeah, Death Is Not the End. It's this UK label that, from what I gather, is specialized in these rare, like, specific compilations of lost recordings or very specific like regions or styles, but they make these compilations that are like basically a collage of just snippets from pirate radio recordings. And there's usually, so the first one I feel like they did was Bristol Pirates, and then there was compilations of adverts from like London. They have one where it's Manchester. They have one that's actually Brooklyn, and it's 2020, and so that is a really surreal one because you hear all the DJs talking about like the pandemic happening. But so yeah, I discovered these like pirate radio compilations, and a total revelation for me. Like music that I felt like I've been dreaming of like discovering. It's so to actually talk about like an early influence. Burial has been, obviously one of my all-time biggest favorite. The reasons I started buying records, or one of the reasons I started making music, so much of my music comes from Burial, and I've always been super influenced by how in an interview he did for The Wire, he mentions that he never goes to clubs, he never goes to raves. This whole like club world he's building in his head is from his brother giving him music that he's heard at these like parties or these raves, or that he's heard on the radio, and it's kind of this imaginary club he's feeling. Instead, he's not an actual raver, and that has always influenced me. The kind of the club in your mind. And Burial's music comes from there, and yeah, just hearing these pirate radio recordings, like this is it. This is exactly, this over exuberant like joie de vivre, the sound, the ads are like selling all these like upcoming raves, and like with just the music, and imagine it's gonna be the time of your life. Who knows what actually happens at the rave? You have a shit time, but in that ad, it just sounds like it's gonna be the shit. And so, yeah, it's just these pirate radio compilations just appeared to me. And I have to mention also, 2021 was a year of grief for me. I had 2 friends that died, and it just was an awful year. So to just have this label also called Death Is Not the End, and digging out all these like pirate radio recordings, and just the world, like the sound world of these compilations, also, sample goldmine for me, like so many people. Like, wow, like it's just these like beat snippets that just appear, and you're like, this beat, like where does this come? So yeah, Death Is Not the End. I really hope they keep at it with these pirate radio compilations. It's even like it's inspired me to try and go on archive.org and try and dig out some of my own, because I'm like, well, how are you finding this material?
Some of your own like pirate radio broadcasts, you mean?
I mean, no, just actually finding, going on archive.org and going
digging up
through all these
right.
archives, because there's hours of these like collected archives that if you have the time to dig through them and take like the highlights out, then yeah, I guess you could. I don't know what that process is. I'd be very curious to just reach out to them and let them know how much of an impact these compilations have had on me, because it's really feels like there's also I do radio myself. It's kind of, you mentioned it, like making your own pirate radio. I do host Underground Sounds here at CKUT, so I'm sort of involved with radio, but I guess for me it's more like my mom, when I was growing up, was always like listening to the BBC, and like I guess nostalgia when we were in France. It's always like the switch between these two stations. So that's it. This like leather tape series to have the DBC, and it says the Dread Broadcast Corporation, but it's their own like radio world, and just the joy and the like this. I don't know how they live music is totally inspiring, and totally feels like it brings me back to this like past my own, but also of radio, and like this UK from the past, or just what lives these people, these hosts must have been having at the time. But once they were behind that booth and they're just on the mic, nothing else mattered, and they're just dashing out. It's inspiring, so inspiring.
Oh, I love it. You mentioned there the letter tape series. That's the one that you earmarked to me as the pick out of all of them. So I wonder what it is about that one that makes it edge to the top for you.
Well, it's so a shame that it's not available online. It's available in tape format, because that one for me, the fact that it like heavily relies around dub and reggae music, which I have to confess, I absolutely love dub and reggae music. I am just completely ignorant about it. I feel like it's always music I've let my friends play and indulge in, and I've just always been like, it's not for me to get into this music. But I've always like really enjoyed. I was really into Massive Attack, and they had all the dub remixes of their tracks and all that. So this tape kind of felt like a good introduction for me. There's even a track on it. Cornell Campbell, You're Walking, and that track, I couldn't find it anywhere online. It's not on YouTube. I had to buy the record, the 12-inch, and that was just like, oh wow, this revelation. Like, it really felt like I was listening to the radio at the time. The host mentioned this track, and I have to look it up and then buy it from a record store. And it's nowhere online, and yet it's one of my favorite reggae songs ever now.
Wow.
So the DBC one hits me very hard, but then it's also like I whenever I share with people, I have to send my own tape for it, because it's not available anywhere else.
Yeah, I'm really glad you shared these with me. I mean, the other one you sent over actually was the Bristol Pirates one, which is great as well. That one seems to have more of the interstitial stuff. There's like phone-in competitions. There's like a lot of stuff where people are ringing in to give shout outs, and there's a really good bit that I really liked where someone's ringing in, and I guess they've got their two kids with them, and they say, oh, my two kids wanted to give a shout out to the silent assassin, but they're too shy to talk on the microphone. So I love the thought of those kids going, Mum, could you just call up and give a little shout out to the silent assassin, like needs to be done. That is wonderful. So this is something that you've discovered since doing your latest album. I mean, one thing that I don't know whether this is a question, just a complete ramble. One thing that feels very similar with your album is, again, this sense of it's about the thing. It's music. It's all the stuff around the music. As you were saying, it's like pointing to the rave. There are tracks on it, but it's kind of pointing at this absent center, because the music isn't really center stage. It's all these people.
It's the event,
yeah. And again, it's got this sense of skipping time. Like the time is not linear at all. You're kind of shuffling. You're snaking through time. So I wonder if you felt that give it some kind of kinship with your record, particularly because the fidelity of these Death Is Not the End stuff is like super lo-fi as well. Is that something you kind of see having a commonality with your output?
No, that's very interesting. Yeah, for sure. The kind of what you said, the music about music, they're very self-referential, and it's like these hosts singing a song about how they're singing this song while it's happening. Definitely, and yeah, obviously the textures of all, like that's it, these like transitions and the beats just get this like little lo-fi moments and the voice warbles out and all. It's just it's all these imperfections that are perfect. They're perfect imperfections. Um,
Yeah.
and so yeah, definitely the quality and the just this sort of imaginary aspect also. There's like yeah, the fact that they're playing it through the radio with this like pirate broadcasting, you have this imaginary of like what the real song is with the whole like
Yes.
bass and the fidelity, but you're getting this like transmission version. And so yeah, there's definitely that kind of aspect in every day as a song where it's like this the source material and then the fact that it's been warbled and changed into recontextualized into something else, but there's still the imaginary of like, oh, what that original like slow pitch sound was. Like if you like I actually had the experience of playing my album at 45 RPM. Kind of like, oh, I should try this out. There's so many of these samples that are from vinyls that I played like half speed. And yeah, if you play a negative loop at 45 RPM, you basically have the Nenon sample that I used with no effects
Oh,
on
no
it.
way.
Yeah, and then it's basically my remix of this like little Nenon loop. But I guess it's the same for non-locality. If you play it at 45, then you get the original neon loop of the saxophone from their track. So it's kind of funny that
Wow.
suddenly these samples would reveal themselves. So it's like, oh yeah, that's actually this, but half speed. Um,
Oh,
so yeah, I don't know where I was going with that, but yeah, the source and the kind of this whatever this filter basically, this kind of vortex of whatever goes through this pirate radio broadcasting or through the everyday the song tape vortex, as we might call it, it's going to come out the other end with a whole new layer of sound.
I love it. Is this stuff? I mean, obviously, with all of these, you've only discovered them and really sunk into them recently. So, is this one that you still listen to now?
Oh, absolutely. No, I keep I keep going through those tapes again to find new samples, and I really have a project I feel like I'm building that is a radio based album, and it's kind of it is pirate radio, but there's also I'm using I don't know why it's just samples of people in films where they're like DJs. Like I have Iggy Pop being a DJ in what's that film? How am I forgetting it? Hardware.
Uh huh.
It's Iggy Pop in Hardware being a DJ. You have Adrian Barbeau in The Fog. Tom Waits imitating a radio DJ. So yeah, it's kind of yeah a radio-based album that has to do with pirate radio, films, samples, and uh, kind of me. Actually, okay, so there's this pedal company, Fairfield Circuitry. They're based in Ottawa here. They just made a pedal that is supposed to emulate radio like sound and quality. Wait, let me look it up. It's called the Roger Dat. It's a FM modulator demodulator. And it controls interfere with demodulation accuracy, resulting in familiar yet unexpected signal degradation and noise. So
Whoa.
I am eyeing this pedal really hard. I don't have $390 right now to get it, but obviously once I do this pedal, yeah, it's gonna inspire it. It's gonna be the new layer to this whole radio album I'm preparing.
Another Watson, now listen. Poncho and Chippo invites you all to a champagne party to be held at the People's Club, 5A Parade Street, on Sunday, the 26th of September. Music by Frontline International, the Hitbound Sound,
Jean, so why don't we go for your second important album now? On my list, it's Yuka Honda. And you picked two here. The one that you picked out as the say preferred pick or the important pick was Memories Are My Only Witness. But yeah, give me a little introduction to Yuka Honda and why this artist is important to you.
So I said she's one of the two members of Cibomato, which is a group I'm a huge fan of. They have this song Sugar Water that I discovered when I was a teenager because Michel Gondry made the music video. And yep, so I've known Thibaut Matteau for a long time, but I guess 2019 I was really exploring New Japan on the label Tzadik, which is all this. So Tzadik is I guess John Zorn's label, and then New Japan was this whole series of Japanese experimental music. It's like, you know, Yamatanka, Boredoms, Merzbow, Ruins, and all that. But so surprisingly enough, Yuka Honda is not on New Japan, but she was on the main label. But I kind of found these two albums through that I consider sister albums. She has like 3 albums on Tzadik, but the two I sent are kind of, I feel like, paired together in terms of sound. And then the last one, the third one came later and is much more abstract and kind of jazz influenced, which is really interesting. But yeah, these two first ones, Memories Are My Only Witness and Eucademix, which also Eucademix kind of became her moniker after like using that for that album. Yeah, I discovered them. I guess I might have discovered them in 2020, but big revelation for me. I'm just like, whoa, there's so much about these two albums. They're like, it's this mix of so many, I don't know, sound influences that you kind of have this like 90s like beat, like Ninja Tune feel to it, but then sometimes it's more like Ennio Morricone kind of soundtrack, and then you have these like little sound design, then like alternative rock numbers, and it's just so expressive, so intoxicatedly well produced. Also, like the production is like mind blowing for me. That it's such a like product of its time, the kind of sounds they use, but then the way they used is like unlike anything else I've heard in that like style of music. So yeah, these kind of two albums kicked my ass. I was just like, wow, like how very underrated. I find it almost interesting that they're on Tzadik because they're so accessible. Actually, it's, you know, there's some clearly like some of the beat design on that album is straight from Thibaut Matteau, but it's kind of more like her then exploring her own ideas and more diversity and experimentations. So yeah, really underrated albums. Like they're not even on YouTube. They're not on Spotify. Once again, these albums like, I'm just like, they need to be shared with the world more.
Yeah. And as you say, Memories Are My Only Witness was the one that you labeled as the important one. So again, what was it that made that one? You mentioned that there's 2 of the 3 that really stick out, and then what was it about that one that just gave it the edge?
I feel like, I mean, honestly, I do love Eucademix. I mean, we are my only witness on the same level, but Memories Are My Only Witness definitely has like more beat. You know, you have this track, Why We Distrust the Machines We Made, the second track after this sort of little like soundtrack type intro, and it's these like 4 different beats just added together, and just so cinematic the way it just goes from one to the next, and the samples, the titles also, and just like what? So like post-rock kind of expressive. You think you're so generous, but it's the most conditional anything I've ever heard. It's so great. That's it. There's also I love how it's like very idiosyncratic, but also very sensual. There's maybe something so like kind of psychedelic, like experimental Japanese music about it also that I really sensibilities that get me. So yeah, it's just been these 2 albums that just kind of stumbled upon just looking at something else, and I'm like, wow, how am I only finding these now? And once again, it's just like I want to sample a snippet of each one of these songs almost. Like.
Yeah. It's quite astonishing to hear them both together actually, because each one is one of those records where every track subverts what you think the record is, and then
it's true, there's never one that sounds like the other.
Especially with Memories Are My Only Witness, I find that the beat based stuff is very much at the front of the record, and then towards the end, you get the beats are there, but they're not that sort of hard trip hop thing. You've got like all the lovely stuff like Night Drive and
sure. The two last ones. No, there's like but the last one to fall asleep with and Night Driving. That's more like expensive and more like emotional and sensual, and it kind of definitely a good contrast with the beginning of the album. That's a bit more manic and kind of fun and
do you have favorite tracks from these records?
I mean, for different reasons, basically. I think the one I mentioned, Why Do We Destroy the Machines We Made, that one just for the beats on it, it's just like an essential. But then I really love the last one to fall asleep with. That's such a beautiful soundtrack number. So well composed. I really love the Some Days I Stay in Bed for Hours. Also, has such a specific mood to it, and it almost feels photo Andy Stott to me. It's kind of in between Yellow Magic Orchestra and like Andy Stott. I feel like this. I don't know. There's something about the style of this track that really gets me on the like. I feel artists trying to emulate this, and it's just this one number out of the entire album that sounds nothing like the others. But then also on Eucademix, I do have to mention there is I Dream About You that has the vocalist of Cibomato joining. So it's basically a Cibomato number since they joined together. Miho Atori. She sings on I Dream About You. And that to just have this like very pop Cibomato number as part of the two albums is really special also. I really cherish that one.
Yeah, that's a beautiful track. Wow, so you mentioned, I think you touched on it a bit there, but that these albums are starting to inform the music that you're making now. So I wondered, it's not always possible to articulate this kind of thing, but what is it about Yuka Honda's music do you think is specifically feeding into the direction that you're going in?
I think clearly the expressiveness, this like personality that's so like that she just makes whatever she wants to make, and it doesn't matter that it's like, one moment it can be like total like dance track, and then it's this like cute soundtrack number, and then it'll be this strange like sound design thing. You can just feel this like, I'm just interested in experimenting and trying out different styles and not feeling like confined. And there's just this personality that's so exuberant in the album with the titles and the kind of diversity and
One interesting fact I read about Yuka Honda was she was born in Japan, and maybe you knew this already, but she was born in Japan and then moved to Germany and then moved to, I think it's like a little village in Denmark, and then moved back to Japan for elementary school, and said that she spoke a mix of all three languages really, and people struggled to understand her, and obviously she had, I think, what they perceived to be these European personality idiosyncrasies. So
I mean, it's relatable for me. I have basically what I call a British accent with French pronunciation, and now it's tinted by like Canadian accent, basically.
Right. Wow.
I have a very strange accent, and so no matter where I am, people look at me weird, and just and the one I get in Canada a lot is, "Are you German?" And it's just,
really?
I have nothing. I have nothing German, and obviously in Europe that's not what people ask. But I guess here the weird French accent or like British accent, but then with French pronunciation. I'm not like saying things of these. It's like it's very German for them. But then I'm like, you don't know German people. They would not like hearing this.
So did you spend time over here then in the UK?
I'm to specify. I am. My father's side is French, and my mother's side is British.
Right, gotcha.
Yep. So I never lived in England, but I was visiting, monthly to go see my English family. My grandpa and grandma used to live also in Munsley, the coastal town of Munsley.
Oh wow! Okay, wow. So something you.
I am actually British. So I guess I mentioned it when I said my mom used to listen to BBC a lot. That was kind of the giveaway.
Of course, that was I wasn't clearly wasn't paying attention. That was the big giveaway. Yeah, so that's interesting. So you can kind of relate to this.
I can relate to accents like that. Having an hybrid accent of just like you've been all around these places and you just had to adapt. And being in Quebec where you have the Quebecois accent and like how that has now affected the way I speak French, but also in a way that makes sense to me because also the way the Quebecois speak French is kind of a direct translation of English. Whereas we French from France, we have our own sort of formulations. So I can do these like direct translations, or I can even say the word in English and they won't bugger me about it here because they will in France because they're like, oh, you're saying an English word, but it's normal. So
I see.
So, yeah. But that's the thing. I go to the UK and they're like, what the fuck is your accent?
Yeah, I mean, because I was thinking with Yuka Honda whether that was I think she even points towards this, like whether that's a factor that leads towards this music which expresses itself not through a singular direction but through a kind of splay in many directions.
Different musical languages being spoken.
Yeah, absolutely. I wondered whether you felt that the way you musically manifest has anything to do with that sensation for you as well.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I really honestly, I felt like I had to come up with my own genre. I call it Cinémathèque Camératronica, it's mostly a play on words. It's Cinémathèque in French is a film library, but here I'm doing cinema techno, and Camératronica is electronic music, but with camera in front. But it is mostly because it's just like, how do I describe what I do? And it's this like interest in so many musical languages, where like I'm as interested in rap music and beats as I am improvised music. And then I mean even in this selection of these three things, I'm like, oh well, I kind of felt like I selected three type of beat music that is not actually part of like live performance or like clubs. It's all like you have radio, you have an experimental music label, and then I guess a video game that's coming up after. So that's it. I'm just I like having as many influences. I like having my metal influences. I like having my glitch, like electronic influences. I like having the improvised, like freeform, and then just mixing all together. I usually like tell people I feel like I make accessible music for the experimental and experimental music for the accessible. It's like there's still some form of structure and coherence and all that, but the best way to justify it was like, well, I'm doing editing, I guess, and that removes then the kind of like instrumental performance aspect of what I do, to just be like, it's editing, but it's also to be like, I will, whatever sound wave I can just slide into my project will be like something I will work with.
Jean, let's go to your final important album or soundtrack as it is. So yeah, tell me what it is and then give me a little introduction. I do consider it
an album though. I like even separated from the soundtrack. I do feel like it stands as an album.
That's
on its
true.
Own, but, yes.
I've not played the game, so I've only heard this as a soundtrack. I've seen it in situ, but yeah, it definitely works. But yeah, go ahead. Tell me a bit about it.
So I chose Yuzo Koshiro's soundtrack for Streets of Rage 2, otherwise known as Bare Knuckles 2, which is a Genesis game. Or I guess, Genesis is the American version. I guess it was Game Gear in Europe. I have to make sure I have the right one here.
That's a good question. Yeah, what was
that? Because oh my god, we're in the whole like North America, Japan, like English translation.
Yeah, there's like three different.
So no, I guess Game Gear is North America and Europe. Okay, so the Game Gear. The Genesis is I guess the Japanese name. Sega Genesis, Game Gear, which is a console I didn't have when I was a kid. I know. I guess I will say I am a video game player. I'm not I'm not a gamer. I'm not to the point of. It's like, I basically feel like I will obsess over very specific games. I'm not like playing games in general, but once in a while I will come across one that I just will get very intense about. And one of them is Streets of Rage. Well, actually, it started with the 4. Okay, how are we doing with time? Do I have time for...
You're good. Do you know what? I saw in your notes you said you got a really interesting story, and I really want to hear it.
Okay, the origin story is bonkers. So, as you might know, in Canada, a lot of people smoke weed, me being one of them. Yeah, I had this friend who was a dealer. I will obviously not say his name for security reasons. But he had what we call a hydroponic setup in his house, where it's this whole like way of growing weed with just like a minimal like system of like drops that keep the... it looks like movie shit. You get into a room and it's walls covered with aluminium and big stalls, and an apartment that just is made for growing these like gigantic plants, buds that you've never seen.
Wow.
That friend had an issue, like had a fight with his landlord or something, and the landlord, as a way of retaliation, called the SWAT on him. So I even heard about this, like a friend was like, "Oh yeah, it looks like there's the SWAT like around well, no, I won't say what road because then that's the location. But mentioned kind of this like street the friend lives on. He's like, yeah, shit, I saw the SWAT like just showing up and then we learned later that it's like, oh, it's our friend's place where they showed up. So yeah, Fuchi, he kind of got out of it. From what I gather, he's going to court against his landlord and things. But yeah, I was, he was my friend before he became my drug dealer. So I'm just like worried about him, and I'm trying to, just keep up, like catch up, and be like, hey, how's it going?
Yeah.
But it's this weird thing where like he just thinks I'm trying to buy weed from him and not like check in.
Oh no.
Like I'm not, I don't want to come buy weed. I want to come see you, see if you're doing okay. So he's like, oh yeah, you can come over and I'll get some good stuff for you and all this. Like, okay, but So I show up to his place and it's just it's sad. It's like I'm trying to be a friend and I'm trying to like emotion, and he's just talking about weed and just that's his only subject. And I'm like, dude, I'm like worried for you and stuff. So it's this like super awkward emotional moment. I'm just like getting worried for my friend. It's like, what is this situation? And the moment is like, do you want to play PS4? And I'm just like, well, why the fuck not? Way of bonding is kind of like, okay, autopilot. He puts on Streets of Rage 4, and I'm just like casually playing this game, but as it goes on, I'm just like, wait, but this is amazing. Like, oh my god, this game is so like smooth and fun, and I'm starting to get hooked to it and forget about this whole like emotional situation about like my friends. So yeah, I walk out of there with some weed. I'm just like, wow, I need to check out Streets of Rage 4 on the Nintendo Switch when I get back home, and I download it and I get hooked. I'm just like, it's just that game. I have 150 hours or something on it now.
Wow.
I just, big revelation for me, and the soundtrack in that one is next level. But yeah, I kind of saw that, they had based Streets of Rage 4 on the second one, the one that came out on Genesis, and there's these moments in the game where you're like kind of in a retro level and it's the retro music, and anytime there's one of those moments, I'm just like, what is this music? Like, it's like the best, like, Genesis, like Super Nintendo type music, like 8-bit stuff. And so on the Switch you do have the Genesis, so they have Streets of Rage 2 on it, so I'm like, I obviously need to check out the original. Then I get hooked to that one because I'm just like, what is this? How did this come out back in the day? Like, this is like, I'm almost glad I didn't discover it as a kid. I'm like, as a kid, I think I tried out Double Dragon and I was kind of like, man, that's fine, just it didn't get me. I'm like, I guess I always just assumed, Streets of Rage was just a second Double Dragon, but then no, I'm playing it, and Yuzo Koshiro's music is like, for me, some of the best best club music I've ever heard. It's some of the best dance music I've ever heard. It's like made for a Genesis video game.
Yeah.
And the way it's conceived, the chip sound, the sounds, the structures, the whole dynamic, it hits you instantly when those songs start playing. And yeah, I just I have video game soundtracks. It's something I enjoy, but for me, Streets of Rage 2 is that. It's a style of its own. There's no other beat music or video game soundtrack or any chip-based music for me that sounds like that has the same result.
So I had a great time with this record. I think one thing that really stood out to me with this is the slight abrasive edge to the music, like the hi-hats, like the open hi-hat on a lot of these tracks is really, it's got that bit crushed harshness to it, which if you got it on speakers really leaps out, but it just gives this very slight jaggedness that it's so interesting. It's in a weird halfway place between video game music and something so much more. What is it about it that makes it really connect with you, do you think, more than other club music, other video game music?
It's just fucking good beats, basically. It just hits me immediately. Some of these tracks, it just as soon as they start, just this is perfection. This is the synth lines hit so well. The bass, there's and that's it. It all has this quality because of the chip and all that. And there's also, he made these when he was pretty young. He actually reflects kind of a lot on that on his Twitter, how he made these songs back in the day with what technology. And he's always kind of I was very youthful and making mistakes. But there is that energy to it that you're it's so, because that kind of what gets me with Streets of Rage also is that if you actually remove the music, the game is pretty slow for a fighting game. It's really slow paced, the way the characters move and all that. The really sense of dynamic you have. Wait, what is the word? More dynamicity? Dynamism, yeah, that's the one. The dynamism you get from that game is with the music and this kind of side-scrolling. It's so narrative, and the way also in the games there's no text or dialogue, so it's kind of just always these scenes and then the music that actually narrates what's happening. So the game would be nothing without its soundtrack. And it's also a very interesting fact I find that Yuzo Koshiro, from what I gather, is the first person to actually video game soundtrack composer to actually own the rights to his own music. Right. So he's actually the first composer that on the title screen you have the game and then it's music composed by Yuzo Koshiro, and that usually never appears. They never put on the title screen who made the music. Yeah. And that's what he's also able to release. This is why it also works as an album of his own, is that he released Bare Knuckles 2 as just a Yuzo Koshiro album, and there's no images of Streets of Rage on it or anything. It's just this is the album. So it's also, that's it. It kind of is music you can have removed from the game and still be super effective. And there's a video also I love. They performed this live at the Red Bull Music Festival in Paris in I believe 2018. Wait, I can look it up. just to see that music being performed, it's done on CDJs but doing effects and all that. But it's god damn, this is one of my dream shows of just this music being played on these big speakers and just experience it like a club, because it's that's what I visualize when I kind of, to get back to the radio thing of Death Is Not the End, of this imaginary club you imagine from this music. I get that from Streets of Rage. It's this is the, so I did pair the first album because the first album also has bangers and the first game is also great, but it's really the second one that is a masterpiece in its own right. But it's I can so easily listen to that music by its own or played with the game. It's both do the thing for me.
It's so interesting now when you explain it like that. You've picked this and the radio one, which do generate this sense of a club, but kind of beamed to these atomized people, right? So you got people in their room just bopping, which, considering you discovered these from 2021 onwards, obviously we were all trying to find means of having these unified experiences through live streams and club nights on like Zoom and stuff like that. So it's very interesting that you pick these almost like proto versions of that sort of collective but atomized experience within these album picks. It's very curious.
Yeah, this kind of imaginary world that we experience from music.
Yeah. You mentioned Streets of Rage 4 being the one that kind of got you into Streets of Rage. Correct me if I'm wrong. So that's a different composer who
different composers. It's multiple of them actually, but I do think Yuzo Koshiro did do some contributions though.
He did, right.
That one is multiple. You have even like Ground is Lava, I think there's one of the tracks on the album, but it's just like one track, so it's kind of different composers, different songs. But the soundtrack on that one is incredible. But obviously, it's with modern sounds and all that, you don't have this whole 8-bit cluster just beats like you had in the original. But you can actually in the game decide to switch the soundtrack to the original. You can actually go to the options that have like old school soundtrack. It's just funny because sometimes the choices of tracks they use for scenes are not really fitting, but it's still fun to experience.
Yeah, because I was going to ask about that, particularly because you've got that bit you mentioned where it suddenly switches into that retro mode on Street Rage 4. I guess it must really highlight the differences between these soundtracks. But yeah, it sounds like you connect with the Streets of Rage 4 soundtrack as well, just maybe not to the same extent. Yeah.
But like also the Streets of Rage 4 is the perfect tribute to Streets of Rage 2. Like the way it just echoes between both of them. Streets of Rage 4 is also a really excellent masterpiece. Streets of Rage 2 has them more like just wow, this is from the past. This is like what? Like this is it. Just imagining me like as a kid, if I had a Genesis, I was playing this. It's like, man, what would I have made as music if this was like my kind of early influence? Like this is almost kind of related to the I've only discovered this music from 2021, but like wow, if this influenced me earlier, like what would have been the result? I definitely have that with Streets of Rage, where it's just like wow, this music was like calling to me almost. Like
I usually ask about favorite tracks at this point. I don't know how applicable that is here, but do you have particular pieces that stand out?
Yeah. I feel like for me, the one that almost feels like a pop song. I'm just like, wow, there's just such a nicely composed song. There's Dreamer. It's preceded. Oh my god, the Ready Funk, the one that comes before is. That one is. I can't even explain how fun. It's amazing that track is. In the bar, also, I actually had an experience recently where I got to DJ at a Casa del Popolo, which is a famous local bar here, and my friend DJs, and so we did it back to back. And I have Streets of Rage 2 on soundtrack, so I was able to play In the Bar. I was DJing. So In the Bar is also a song I absolutely love. Wave 131 also, man, so good. That's it. I just look at the trackers. I'm like, this is the album. I just without the context of the game, I'm just looking at the tracks and be like, yeah, this one is so great. And yeah, Alien Power for me is like, wow, it's you could release that on Warp these days and it would fit. People wouldn't complain about a track like Alien Power being re-released in 2023 on Warp Records.
Right. I mean, the first track on Bare Knuckles 2 sounds like an early Aphex thing.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, that's it. There's that kind of very acid techno feel to it, but I don't know. It's I do listen to techno and electronic and beat music, but yeah, there's nothing that really for me hits like Yuzo Koshiro hits. There's no it's this genre or this school of production that it's really just this one guy who had one job saying that he had to make the soundtrack for this fighting game and just fucking did a masterpiece.
Yeah. You DJ'd this. What was the reaction? That's so fascinating to get it suddenly in a social space. How did it go down?
no one recognized it at Casa del Popolo, but now that I recall, I did play it also in a DJ set that I did at La Lumière, which is like a micro cinema, and it was like an abstract film screening. And someone did recognize it was from Streets of Rage 2, and it was like, hey, my man, like, okay,
that's lovely.
the abstract experimental film screening, but you do know about Streets of Rage 2. And, and he also said the poll was really good, so we bonded over that, because if he didn't like it, then it would have probably killed that buzz, but...
Jean, this has been so good. Like, what a bounteous selection of records that you give me to dive into, and I've had, as I've said, a stellar time with all of them, and with your record as well. I mean, what one other question I like to ask is about how you tend to buy and listen to music kind of day to day. Like, what are the formats you usually go for? Where do you go to buy your music? Yeah, tell me a bit about that.
That's really interesting you asked that, because wow, this album is kind of about that, about like how music bleeds into my life. And I kind of I've decided, since I'm 16, I've committed to just like, my life is music, like my social environment is artists. I keep going to shows, I keep like listening to music, I make music from music, like I need to listen to music to then make my own because it requires me. So yeah, and that's it, having a tape collection but not having the means to listen to it, and now like having the Walkman, so that obviously made my tape collection during pandemic just started like blowing up. I've been collecting vinyls, I guess, since I'm like 14. I started, like, my two first records were actually Burial and Fortet.
Wow.
Yeah, Muffin Wolf Cub, because there's just like, when did that come out? 2008? I was 15 or like 14. And it's just like, wow, I want to listen to this, but I need to buy the actual record. And my dad had a turntable that was still in the garage. So I just, bought this record and then was like, oh, well, I guess I need to keep going from here. Like, not just have the one. And so, that's been growing. That's like, it grew in France, then it started growing in Montreal. There's definitely like, I go a lot to shows. So usually like merch table used to be really nice back in the day. It still is nice. It's coming back at least. But so yeah, just like music is omnipresent in my life, but then there's not this like, no, I don't dedicate like, oh, I need to listen to an album a day, or like, oh, I need to, like, anytime I go to a show, I will like buy like something from the. It's kind of chaotic and just really like been all over the place. It's like, through like digital tape, vinyl, shows, like jams with friends. It's just, like, my life is always just surrounded by music. And then a big part about this album was also just this, like, you're hearing music and sound even when you go outside. There's all this like, cars passing by you, they're like blasting a song, and you go in the supermarket and there's music playing. And when you're just in that state of just being attentive to sound, when you're walking with a Walkman and you're just like, oh, I might capture sound here and that, there's this abundance of sound. And so there's a video during pandemic, then seeing this whole like discourse about music, about streaming, about like these new ways that like artists should be making music and all that. And for me, it just felt completely like obsolete and just contradictory to my whole experience of music and sound. That I don't use. So this is the one format I don't use is streaming. I don't stream music. I don't have a Spotify account. And it's not to be Banksy or some shit and be like, what people like use that, but it just doesn't fit into my way of consuming music. And then there's all these like discourses and talks about streaming. I'm like, that is
wow.
Stepping up the iceberg for me. That you're not even getting to all this other way of like music being part of your life and consuming, and how to create, and that's definitely seeing a lot of conversations where like people just fundamentally don't get how people create, like how creation happens, and like, oh, it's this preconceived, like you walk in the studio and you know exactly what you're gonna do and what result you're gonna get, and it's like, no, for me it's the complete opposite. It's the most chaotic, like whatever sounds I will come across that I can grab and just stick into a song and make it work. I don't know.
That's fabulous.
I don't know if that answers your question.
That definitely does. That is brilliant. I think that's wonderful in amongst the abundance of music you're taking, and that streaming doesn't play a part in it. Sounds like there's a lot of human interaction that's facilitating discovery, which is so lovely. And that I think once you get on the wagon with streaming, you need to actually actively find means of doing that again. Yeah.
That's it. Like, yeah, I think it's edgy to say this, but I do consider Every Day as a Song an anti-algorithm album. It's like this doesn't fit into an algorithm of like, oh, it's because you've experienced this and now you're gonna receive this or you're gonna be into this. It's like, it's just walk outside and see what music you get. Don't stand on it.
Amazing. That feels like a lovely place to wrap up. Jean, thank you so much for your time. This has been great.
Your pleasure. Thank you.
To everyone listening, and see you next time. Goodbye.
Thank you. Yeah.